in skeletal muscle and liver in the form of glycogen. My hope is that as I'm in here, after I've eaten my breakfast, got here, got everything ready for class, and yes, I was like a minute late this morning. I apologize for that. But as I get here, and I'm up here, and as y'all know by now, I can't talk without moving my hands, okay? And I gotta move around, all right? My hope is that glucose is not gonna get stored in the fat cells, all right? That I'm gonna use those glucoses I gave it. Now, if I could be up here teaching class and running around and jogging, woo-woo, which I can't do, all right, most likely my body would, but let's say I did, okay? Let's say that I got to come up here and I got to jog around class as I'm talking to y'all, all right? Y'all could just see me just jogging around. Most likely, the way that my skeletal cells will probably make energy is by way of glycolysis. Okay? So that glucose molecule would make it to the cytoplasm. It would go through. Now, in that cytoplasm would be all of those little proteins that they represented in the video, and that glucose would simply begin to get changed around in structure. And as it gets changed around in structure, it would give me 2 ATPs. That's it. But because I ate something that was a starch that had chains of the glucose molecules, okay, it could use that glucose. Give me 2 ATPs. Use another one. 2 ATPs. Use another one. 2 ATPs. So that I would be providing the energy for me to be able to jog around class while I'm talking. Now, I don't jog around. Okay? Yes, I'm up here talking with my hands and so forth. Most likely, I'm making my energy in the mitochondria. But the process of glycolysis gives me those products that are needed to go into the mitochondria. So during this stage, because depending upon the literature you read, they'll say that this process has either 3 or 4 stages. The first stage is glycolysis. This portion of making ATP uses no oxygen. It will give you ATP if the products go into aerobic respiration. That's great. If not, it produces lactic acid, which builds up in the skeletal muscle cells and makes them sore.
So you said it doesn't use oxygen, so it'd be anaerobic.
This is anaerobic respiration.
Anaerobic produces lactic.
Produces the lactic acid. So the process of glycolysis is anaerobic, meaning no oxygen. we produce very little ATP if the products are not going to the mitochondria. We produce the lactic acid. And it basically stops. However, if your body is not needing the energy that way, the products now can go into the mitochondria. So those two pyruvates. Now what they're showing here, because glucose is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbon molecule. It has taken those 6 carbons, which have hydrogens, okay, in all those little proteins that were present, and it has rearranged that 6 carbon into 2 3 carbons, which are my pyruvates. So, in cell respiration, meaning we are now going to have oxygen, all right? The second stage, depending on literature that you look at, okay, they will say the second stage is where these pyruvates, these pyruvic acids, they now get shuttled to the mitochondria. So my 2 pyruvates, I'm going to just label them the P's, okay? They'll now get shuttled to my mitochondria. In the mitochondria, in the middle of it, it has a matrix. Is everybody familiar with that term? It's in the cells, it's like a gel type fluid that's present. So those pyruvates, they now get to move into my mitochondria and then start this process. Do you guys remember the acetyl-CoA? Because if I now have that 3 carbon chain, one of the carbons broke off, mixed with oxygen. This is why it's aerobic. Okay? When you're in the mitochondria, we have oxygen. If oxygen is present, it's considered aerobic. So, it takes that 3 carbon into 2 carbons. That carbon that was given off becomes part of CO2 that we have to breathe out. And once that takes place, do you remember how it attached that little group, that little acetyl coenzyme A to the 2 carbons? Does everybody remember that? Okay, so once it did that, that had to go into the Krebs cycle. Now, in the presence of oxygen, this is what we say is cellular respiration. They call it cell breathing. Because we're using oxygen, we're giving off CO2. Isn't that what we do as an organism? We breathe in oxygen, we give off the CO2. So, As this sugar continues to break down, and the CO2, water, all these molecules being given off, we're going to get to make ATPs. But the largest amount of ATPs is not from glycolysis or what's known as the Krebs cycle. It's going to be important for my electrons to get to the electron transport chain. On the videos, how were the electrons represented?
Little blue dots.
The little blue dots, and that were picked up by NAD, NADH, and FAD. How does that happen? How many of you have taken chemistry? Do you remember oxidation reduction? Do what, John? Do what? I didn't either. Because in oxidation reduction reactions, you had to balance what, Kevin?
The equations.
But you had to balance what in
The
you?
electrons.
The electrons. And you balance those electrons using what? Hydrogen ions. H pluses. Now, each time in the Krebs cycle, you guys remember the Krebs cycle that's taking place in the matrix of the mitochondria? Okay? Did you hear them mention in that video about the breaking down of these carbons and hydrogens and stripping the electrons? Did you hear them mention that? Okay. If I'm getting those electrons, and there were like quite a few of them, right? Because by the time we were done, we had quite a few of those little NADHs and FADHs shuttling electrons. Do you happen to remember where in the mitochondria?
In the inner membrane across the proton pump.
And the name for it?
Matrix?
Well, if they're shuttling those electrons, they're shuttling those electrons to the part of the membrane known as the electron transport chain. And as they shuttled those little electrons, which were the blue dots, what did you see flowing across the membrane? They were the little blue circles that had a plus in it. Those were hydrogen ions. So, in our Krebs cycle, where we have those pyruvates go in, and as they make their way around the Krebs cycle, all of those little carbons came off, all those little hydrogens came